Welcome back, class. As you know, you're in AP US History, and this is week 5. So last week, we talked about the lead up to the American Revolution. We talked about like the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, all of the things that were happening leading up to the beginning of the American Revolution. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. As you see here, this beautiful picture, we have our founding fathers. And we will get to that very soon. But first, we're going to recap leading up to the American Revolution. Cameron, what is this picture right here? What do we have here? We got British shooting at men and women.
I think it's the Boston Massacre?
Yes, we have the Boston Massacre here. So, the lead up to the American Revolution, we had the Stamp Act. Which was in March 1765, and that was the tax that the British government placed on the American colonies in order to help pay the French and Indian War, as you remember, really drained the British economy. And so the Stamp Act was a way of getting money back from the colonies to pay for the defense of the American colonies. We had the Townshend Acts. Hayden, do you remember what the Townshend Acts are? I know. We had the weekend. I know it was a long weekend.
Yeah. I can't think of it at the moment.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay. It was a series of acts, taxes that were placed on the colonies, much like the Stamp Act, to raise the revenue and to also pay the governors and the government officials a higher wage in order to make sure that they stayed loyal to the British Crown. We had, as Cameron mentioned, we had the Boston Massacre, which was British troops firing upon the colonists. Interesting story about the Boston Massacre, if you don't remember. John Adams was placed in charge of defending the British officers that fired upon the colonists, and I think 6 out of 8 of them were completely absolved of any crime, and two of them did receive jail time, but I think they were eventually pardoned. So very interesting how John Adams will fit into the rest of this class. We had the Boston Tea Party, which was classic. We all love the Boston Tea Party. The Sons of Liberty dressing up as Indians and dumping the tea into the harbor. We all love that story. And then we had the Coercive or Intolerable Acts, and that was the punishment of the British government punishing the colonists for the Boston Tea Party. Basically placed all of Boston under direct rule of the British Crown. And so this is kind of the landscape of where we're going towards the American Revolution. So first, the kind of kickoff of the American Revolution was the battles of Lexington and Concord. And this occurred on April 19th, 1775. 700 British troops departed from Boston towards Lexington. The British government had heard that there was a cache of weapons being stored at Concord, and so they were on their way to seize those weapons. However, on their way, they encountered little Patriot resistance when they arrived in Lexington, and then there was what was called the shot heard around the world, which was the first shot fired. There was a little skirmish in Lexington, and the British pushed them back towards Concord. At Concord, there was a ton of fighting throughout the day. The colonists had heard that the British were coming, so the weapons had actually been moved, and so the British didn't find any weapons there. And so then, when they didn't find any weapons, they turned around towards Boston. And then the American militia followed them, gained more and more militia came as they trekked back to Boston, and that ended up with 75 British dead, 175 wounded, 50 missing, to the 50 dead of the Americans, 40 wounded, 5 missing. So it was a victory for the colonists, but it was really much more important as the beginning of real hostility in the American Revolution. So then we have the Second Continental Congress, which convened in May 1775. Natalie, who's this beautiful man right here?
George Washington.
George Washington. Yes, and then here we have the building Philadelphia. So they met in Philadelphia. All 13 colonies were present there, and they demanded for their individual rights. The Continental Congress established an army and a navy, and they named this beautiful man right here the chief of the Continental Army. So now we have just a few events, 2 battles, and a big, huge event in the middle of 1775. First we had Fort Ticonderoga, which was kind of north, I think it's in like central New York, but north of everything happening. The Continental Army sent Benedict Arnold and the Green Mountain Boys, and they captured Fort Ticonderoga. And more importantly, they brought the cannons from the fort back to Boston for George Washington. We had the Battle of Bunker Hill, which was on June 17th, 1775, which is depicted here. The British attacked an American-held hill. The Americans were centered on top. The British were beaten back twice before the Americans ran out of ammo and were forced to flee. And this left about 1,000 British soldiers killed. And it was really the first big battle that proved that Britain could be defeated. And then in July 1775, there was the Olive Branch Petition, which was a petition sent by a Continental Congress to King George III asking for peace. Congress didn't want to fight. They were hoping that they could settle something with King George. King George decided against that, refused the petition, and declared the colonies in open rebellion, which really sparked the revolution as being a revolution. That left Continental Congress with no choice. Now, we have the failed invasion of Canada. Now, who here knew that America invaded Canada in the Revolutionary War? Anybody? I know, right? Pretty crazy. In the fall of 1775, 2 American armies went up north to Quebec in hopes to invade Canada and win the French Canadians over to join their cause. Here we have good old American dying here. In reality, the French Canadians did not support the Americans. They supported the British. The British had enacted the Quebec Act, which was it helped the Quebec Act gave many territories to Canada, kind of like the Great Lakes area, Indiana, and also helped pro-Catholic attitudes, a lot of Catholics up in Canada, and that really cemented the French Canadians kind of towards the British crown. Yes, Natalie.
Sorry, just to make sure I'm understanding.
Yes.
The Americans invaded Canada
Yes.
to try and make friends with them.
Yes. So they invaded Canada in hopes to take the British army out, but hoped that the civilians living up there would join the American cause against the British crown.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And after that failed, in the fall of 1775, we had the beginning of 1776. The Continental Army was getting more solidified, more standardized, and then we had the British fleet of Boston on March 17th. So those cannons that were taken from Fort Ticonderoga were mounted above Boston on Dorchester Heights. Here we got Washington looking over. This put Boston in fear of being bombarded, and the British General Howe was forced to abandon, took 11,000 soldiers and hundreds of pro-British colonists, and they left via boat. And then that left Boston in American hands. And then we come to Common Sense, which was actually before fleeing Boston. But Common Sense was published on July 10th, or January 10th, excuse me, 1775, was written by Thomas Paine. Olivia, could you tell us, do you remember what Common Sense, what Common Sense is about? What it did?
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
All right. It was, sort of.
Okay.
It was sort of. It was one of the most popular American books, stories, titles, but one of the best-selling titles in America. And it made the argument of why America should split from Britain and become independent. It was titled Common Sense. Actually, fun fact, a paper that I wrote in college about Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush and Thomas Paine were friends. He suggested the title Common Sense, and Thomas Paine chose it. Now, Common Sense, it called for the establishment of a republic and for people to govern themselves in the colonies, not from a ruler halfway across the world. And Paine connected the king's treatment of colonists to the idea of independence and free will. And then we have, of course, the Declaration of Independence, probably one of the most famous documents in the world, not only America, but in the world. It was proposed to the Continental Congress on June 7th and passed on July 2nd. And Olivia, what?
Sorry.
Life, liberty, and?
Pursuit of happiness.
Yes. It's Congress. It was Congress's response for the need of a formal statement of the reason why they were fighting the war, and also the reasons for independence. Thomas Jefferson was selected to write it. Now, Thomas Jefferson, we'll see a lot more in our class. Huge American figure, third president of the United States. He stated in this document what he and his fellow delegates believed about the rights of man in America. He relied on Thomas Paine's Common Sense for kind of logic in writing it. He addressed the entire world, not only Britain in this document, but he addressed the entire world and used phrases from British legal history to establish its dominance and it being a significant piece of legal writing. He detailed a very long list in the Declaration of why Americans should rebel and should be independent from Great Britain. And he also stated that America had done everything in its power, sending the Olive Branch Act and wanting peace, and King George refusing it, and he made that statement in here. And he also directed all of his attacks on Great Britain solely on the king and not on Parliament. So this was really attacking the king and why the king had caused America to split from Great Britain. Yes, Natalie.
With the using British legal phrases.
Yes.
Do we know if he was trying to continue British tradition or trying to replace it, or?
That's a very good question. I don't actually know the answer to that, but I can get back to you on next class.
Awesome.
Yes. Now, we have two sides of the revolution. What two sides were there? Cameron, two sides?
The American and British.
Yes, good job. So we have the Americans. First we have the Americans and the Patriots. Patriots, now this is, yes, Olivia?
Why are they called patriots?
Patriots, because they were very patriotic,
Okay.
very patriotic to their new country that they were trying to found. I actually don't know. It's what's the history of words? Etymology. Linguistics. Yes. But I would guess that they feeling patriotic about their new nation, patriot. That's my best guess. So the Patriots. Now this is a very generalization overview. And so they were minority of the population supported the revolution, and when I say that, a minority of the population were willing to pick up a gun and go out and fight for the revolution against the British colonies. Generally, they were from the north and backcountry areas. generally, they tended to be younger. They weren't the older, established, government officials that had money. They were young, didn't have much to lose, and felt this new wave of idealism. Yes, Cameron.
Were there any of the founding fathers that participated in the revolution other than just writing and signing the documents?
Well, we had George Washington, General George Washington.
Okay.
John Adams, he was very much a more writing guy. Benjamin Rush, who I mentioned earlier, he served as a doctor. We had Alexander Hamilton. I know he was present for a lot of battles. I don't know if he actually fought. But so yes and no, I'd say. Now, generally, they were poorly trained, but as the war went on, help from Europe, from France, from Germany, a lot of these other countries sent over military officials and diplomats to help train, which we will get into on the next slide. But they also knew the landscape a lot better than the British did. Examples, so here we got good old George Washington. Here we have the first three presidents in order: George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson. We have Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, etc. Lots of the normal founding fathers that we normally talk about. And then on the other side, we had the Loyalists, or the British sympathizers. The British Army as well would fall into that category. They believed that they would be rewarded by the king after the war had been won. Generally more common in the South and in cities, metropolitan areas, because they were if you lived in the city, you tended to have a higher paying job, either you're a government official, a judge, you had a set job, and you were being paid by the crown, and therefore you were loyal. Tended to be wealthy, educated businessmen, government officials, people who had something to lose, generally sided with the loyalists. This wasn't all true. George Washington, he was pretty wealthy. John Adams was a very famous lawyer. Now these were exceptions to the rule. But generally, if you were well educated, you were governors, very, very much so were loyalists. And the army itself, the British Army, extremely well trained, but had to travel across the Atlantic to get there. All their supplies, unless they were taking it from the colonies, had to be sent over via boat, and that takes a lot of time, effort, money. And then examples, these are names you might not recognize, but here we have William Franklin, Thomas Hutchinson, Thomas Brown. Now, William Franklin, you might see William Franklin, Benjamin Franklin. There is a connection. William Franklin was Benjamin Franklin's son. He was actually the governor of New Jersey, and he very much differed with the opinion of his father, remained loyal to the British crown, and then eventually had to flee, go back to England, and that's where he lived out the rest of his life. And he never made up with his father, which is very sad. I hope you all would make up with your father if you were split in a revolution like this. Thomas Hutchinson, he was the mayor of Massachusetts Bay. I think his house was burned down or sacked. He was very much a loyalist. He didn't really understand what was happening. Also had to flee back to Great Britain. And then Thomas Brown, he was a famous Southerner. I think he was from Georgia, or from one of the Carolinas, but he led the King's Rangers, which was kind of an elite fighting group of the British Army in Georgia. And then now we have foreigners who fought for America. This is very important. America did not fight this battle alone, and that's very important to share. Now, if any of you have seen Hamilton, Hamilton here, we got Lafayette, a very, very famous French general in the American Army. He came over, he trained, he also brought along with him the French Navy, which really helped, extremely helped the American cause, and he helped train the American troops. Here we got von Steuben. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. But he was extremely important in helping train the American Army in terms of like rank, like formations, hygiene, and he also helped teach bayonet. Here we have Casimir Pulaski. Again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, not the best. But he was very famous for reforming American cavalry, which was very important during that time. Father of American cavalry. Now, Cameron, could you please pronounce this name for us?
Tad.
Very good. So here, I'm not even going to attempt to butcher his name, but he was Polish, very famous for helping build American fortifications. And then we have Van de Kalb. He was a German army administrator, general. Now, all these men have something in common. They're not American, yet they came over to help fight against, it might have been more so to fight against the British than for the Americans, but they did come over to help fight with the Americans. Yes, Olivia.
Why so many Polish people?
Very good question. Again, I don't know the answer to, but there are, yeah, I don't know why so many Polish people. That's a very good question. I will get back to you on that next class. I'll have to start a list here. We got so many. But yeah, so we have a Prussian, French, 2 Poles, and a German. So basically all of England against Britain, which very interesting and kind of speaks to the state of the world, state of Europe at that time. Willing to send generals to help fight foreign war. Now, we're going to move into discussion of Thomas Paine's Common Sense. If I had more time, we would have a discussion, but that's the end of my presentation. So.